Hello and welcome to the GigaOM Research webinar on the business case for Hadoop. During this hour, our expert panel will discuss Hadoop's sweet spot in big data processing, including ETL offload from the data warehouse and the cost savings and benefits from integrating Hadoop with the existing infrastructure. We'll talk about challenges that you'll face with Hadoop, how to make it work, and how to approach your business case. I'm Richard Winter, the panel moderator. I'm a GigaOM research analyst and an independent consultant in big data and analytic databases. Just to review the order of events, we'll first introduce our panel, have a brief message from our sponsor, which is SyncSort, and then we'll discuss Hadoop adoption, use cases, and a particular use case, ETL offload. We'll have a couple of polls that you, the audience, can participate in, and we'll discuss how do you make it work, what are the key challenges and how do you approach them, and how do you approach the business case. At the end, we'll have Q&A for the audience, and you're welcome to submit questions via chat at any time. Next chart, please. So let's introduce our panel. I've introduced myself, so Ron Bodkin, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Richard. So I'm Ron Bodkin. I'm the founder and CEO of Think Big Analytics. We're the first and leading consultancy that's exclusively focused on big data. We started in 2010 and have worked with leading enterprises in financial services, technology, online media and publishing, helping them with both strategy, road mapping, and building big data infrastructures, the engineering, and then data science on top of that. Hadoop is a core technology. We see it as foundational for big data, and very much excited to share some of our experience in those 3.5 years of work with the audience today.
Great. Our next panelist is David Lotion. David, will you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Richard. My name is David Lotion. I'm the president of Knowledge Integrity Incorporated, which is a company that focuses on data management consulting. I actually have 25 years of experience in high-performance computing, going back to the days of the origination of massively parallel processing computers, and recently the author of a book called Big Data Analytics, From Strategic Planning to Enterprise Integration with Tools, Techniques, NoSQL, and Graph. And I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
Thanks, David. Sounds like an interesting book. And our last panelist is Lonnie Jaffe, CEO of SyncSort, and also our sponsor. So Lonnie, will you introduce yourself? And then I'll turn it over to you to give your brief presentation.
Thanks. So my name is Lonnie Jaffe. I'm the CEO of SyncSort, where I'm working to organically grow our exciting new Hadoop-based product line that's been getting deployed in some of the most enterprise-scale customers in the world, as well as to grow inorganically. As we started going through acquisition last year, acquiring companies with extraordinary talent and highly differentiated software that we think we can advance our strategy and easily snap into our existing technology. Before SyncSort, I was the Senior Vice President of Corporate Strategy at CA Technologies, and before that I was with IBM for over a decade, where I led healthcare and government software, and I also led the mergers and acquisitions deal team that did more than half of IBM's 2011 software acquisitions, mostly advanced analytics software companies.
Okay.
I can go ahead and quickly talk through our sponsor slides. So SyncSort has thousands of customers in over 80 countries. We have 87 of the Fortune 100 companies are our customers. The company's been around for many decades and recently has been focused on this new Hadoop-based product line, which we think of as a universal upgrade for Hadoop. It makes Hadoop run a lot faster, it makes it easier to use, and it improves the connectivity to other systems the early consumer internet companies that adopted Hadoop, like Google and Facebook and Amazon and Twitter, they didn't have mainframes and they weren't trying to offload workloads from legacy data warehouses into Hadoop. But the grown-up companies who are using it all do have these challenges, and that's been a big part of our focus. We made some significant contributions to the Apache Hadoop trunk, which got committed earlier in 2013, most notably MapReduce 2454, which made the sort pluggable and allowed us to infuse our engine into all of the nodes in the cluster. And that includes our advanced optimizer that dynamically chooses the right algorithm to use based on the nature of the workload and the underlying hardware. And we've built some interesting partnerships with, and very close, deep partnerships with some of the leading vendors in the big data space, including almost all the major Hadoop distributions like Cloudera. We have a close partnership with Amazon on Elastic MapReduce, Tableau, Vertica, and lots of others. And if we go to the next slide, recently we've been focused on the opportunity around offloading legacy data warehouse pre-processing as well as mainframe batch workloads into Hadoop, which allows customers to save money, substantial amounts of money in many cases. It also allows them to create a Hadoop cluster, which becomes better and better over time and makes it easier to attract and retain talent, and then also allows the Hadoop environment to become a long-term active archive of all of their data. And that's been manifesting itself in not just our high-performance Hadoop product, but a whole array of our big iron to big data offerings, including some new things we just released over the last few weeks, like a SQL analyzer that helps to identify SQL capabilities, low-hanging fruit SQL that would be easy to move to Hadoop, as well as an SMS analyzer that does the same thing for the mainframe. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Lonnie. Actually, as someone I've known about the SyncSort company for a long time, and it's only recently that I've become aware that you've done all this innovative work in the Hadoop space, and it's interesting to hear about. So now let's move on to the kind of main focus of our webinar. And the first question I'd like to ask our panelists is, what, in your experience, is Hadoop being used for today? Ron, do you want to start the ball rolling on that question?
Yeah, I'd be glad to, Richard. You know, I think about this in two ways. One is we see that companies use Hadoop, that there's a journey as they start and get more sophisticated, that the use cases and approaches build on the previous stages of adoption. So the first stage of adoption we tend to see with Hadoop is IT cost optimization. That could be doing transformations of data that's being loaded into a database, data warehouse. It could be offloading mainframe processing in a batch mode. Typically it's offline and non-mission critical. That tends to then feed the next stage of adoption, where now you've started to build a data lake. You've got lots of different, diverse, innovative data sources in a single place. You can start to do agile analytics, start to allow the business to have a better ability to explore and understand data that they couldn't before, moving beyond traditional BI paradigms. And then from there, we see real opportunities to move into more business innovation scenarios, where you're now starting to have predictive analytics in a closed loop. You're starting to understand more of things like a recommendation engine in the case of making consumer recommendations, or cases like predictive failure models for devices that are phoning home data to predict before something breaks so that you can service it more efficiently. So those types of closed loop predictive analytics models represent one of the more sophisticated use cases for Hadoop, where you're starting to take in large data sets, do data science to explore it, then ultimately do an automated predictive model that gets scored in Hadoop and pushed out to an edge system that's responding. That's mostly what people are doing today with Hadoop, although there's a lot of emerging use cases around more real time. The other way to slice it is to think across the many different industries and areas where people are applying Hadoop. That itself is a long thing to talk about, but we see clusters of interest around customer interaction, often starting with clickstream data, where we've made investments to help customers move quickly. as well as in financial services. Things like fraud analytics are becoming very important, and an area where Hadoop is important, and we're seeing large-scale adoption. And then device data in the tech sector is another really important area where we see a lot of adoption of Hadoop. So that's the other way to slice it. And while those three are main practice areas for us, we certainly know there's other industries, government, healthcare, et cetera, retail, where we've had some involvement, and we see there's a lot of adoption going on as well.
Well, thanks. That's a nice introduction and some good examples. David, what kind of uses are you seeing?
Well, I took an opportunity not too long ago to go over to the Hadoop, the Apache's website. They actually have an enumeration page. The opportunities for improving performance through system data management augmentation. So putting data onto Hadoop so that you can just put more data or keep more data available at it, or allow there to be more rapidly accessible history data for analytics or BI and reporting. A lot of BI querying, reporting, searching, creating indexes, a lot of these operational activities. Third category you might call non-database applications, where they're just making use of a scalable, high-performance architecture to be able to deploy applications like image processing or text processing in preparation for publishing, or even going beyond what we typically in the BI space see, things like genome sequencing or protein sequencing or protein structure prediction, and these kinds of high computation activities that are better, that typically would have gone to high priced systems, now can be deployed because the barrier is lowered due to using commodity hardware and open source tools. The fourth category is the classes of applications like predictive models and recommendation engines. I typically group them as data mining and analytical applications, profile matching, facial recognition, recommendation engines, ad optimization, machine learning tools, behavior analysis. I guess the customer analytics would fall into that as well. Social network analytics, those kinds of things. So those are some of the high level categories that we've been seeing. I think practically the starting point seems to be system augmentation and being able to offload a lot of your data, or to create a scalable or extensible data management platform that allows you to get faster access to more stuff for the same types of applications that we've already been doing for, say, the last 10, 15, 20 years. I think that is a lot of when I see boots on the ground, that's what they seem to be doing.
Yeah, it's interesting how much of the current activity falls in that category. And now with Hadoop, there's an opportunity to kind of very economically receive these very large volume flows in some cases and refine them, and very rapidly, because of the parallel architecture, pull out of that flow the sensor readings that are of most significance for engineering or operations or the business. So that's another kind of interesting category.
To me, Richard, that's very much that's very much a great example of what we refer to as agile analytics, where you take a new data set like sensor data, or it could be text or other data sets that people traditionally haven't been able to work with at scale, and really get deeper insights, right? Doing analytics on devices that are deployed in the field, whether it's a B2B scenario or a B2C, whether it's a consumer device or a device sold to other businesses. That's a great example of how having this ability to work with data not only at scale, but also a much more flexible architecture where in Hadoop you can plug in different custom code to do analysis on data, user-defined functions in Hive or Pig, or down to a lower level of programming. You can get deeper insight into the data than was really feasible before. So I think that's a great example of agile analytics using Hadoop to go beyond simply augmenting your old systems to starting to do new classes of analysis and data processing that weren't really feasible before.
Yeah, so I agree, and that's kind of an area of excitement I see. And another one I think is one that Lonnie began the discussion about. Lonnie, do you want to add anything about how Hadoop is actually being used today?
Yeah, so we're seeing all of these advanced use cases like the Internet of Things style telemetry use cases, as well as some of the others that we've just discussed. But one of the most common scenarios that we're seeing in at least the large-scale deployments of our Hadoop-based product at the more grown-up companies like the large banks and hospitals and government entities is this use case around offload. And the way it's playing out, at least in our accounts, is you'll have a customer with maybe 6 or 7 different source systems. One of them might be the mainframe, and there's a whole array of difficult things that you need to do when you pull down mainframe data, like EBCDIC to ASCII conversion, and occurs depending on in COBOL copybook imports. Today, they're pulling that data from those 6 source systems, putting it in a data warehouse, maybe doing some legacy ETL beforehand. In the data warehouse itself, they're doing ELT, essentially pre-processing, which in some cases is using up almost half the data warehouse's processing capability. And then later they're running some analytics against it, maybe a business intelligence tool. And what they do is they put a Hadoop cluster in between the source systems, the 6 different source systems, and the downstream data warehouse, using it as a pre-processor. Don't change any of their business processes yet. They just flow the data through Hadoop. They do the pre-processing in Hadoop, usually using MapReduce in many cases with our product. And then they're able to both offload tremendous amounts of capacity from the downstream data warehouse by pre-processing in Hadoop first, as well as from the mainframe. And as a side effect, they get a Hadoop cluster that is also a long-term active archive of a much longer time period of data. They can keep years of data instead of months, or months of data instead of days. And then there's aspirations in the medium to longer term to actually run advanced analytics directly against the cluster or against a nearby system. So pre-processing in Hadoop and then sending the processed data into maybe a NoSQL repository or a columnar database instead of to the traditional legacy data warehouse. That scenario also frees up a lot of financial resources because the cost differential is just so vast, right? We're seeing some customers with $100,000 or $200,000 a terabyte of total cost associated with the legacy data warehouses, and sometimes substantially less than $1,000 a terabyte in Hadoop.
Mm-hmm.
Lonnie, one thing we see a lot is when customers want to do that kind of cost optimization, shifting from legacy platforms, there's usually some additional functionality that they're trying to achieve, that while they're in the midst of porting a system over from one platform to another, there's some small set of changes, enhancements, improvements that they want to make at the same time. So I'm curious, that's generally what we've seen in these projects. I'm curious if you see customers also wanting to make those kinds of changes, or you tend to see more of a port it over as is, bug compatible, and then worry about improving it later.
There's definitely interest in doing next generation analytics, things that can only be done against Hadoop. Also, performance is a major issue. Sometimes they're actually stretching the capacity limits of the performance capabilities of the legacy data warehouse. And then they're also making, to your point, decisions not just based on a point of time of capability, but the pace of improvement. So they're seeing the environment around Hadoop get better so much faster than the environment around, some of the legacy data warehouses, and they're making investments that are sometimes 5 or 10-year time horizons. And they have relatively near-term aspirations to do advanced multivariate predictive analytics or other types of graph-based or machine learning type analytics. And they know that the amount of venture capital that's flowing into the world of Hadoop and the nearby Hadoop systems is making that environment get better faster than almost anything else in the technology industry. And so they're not just making maturity bets on the point in time today, but also the near and not so near future.
So a wide range of examples we discussed there, from cost optimization to new uses that weren't practical before. I want to ask our panel, I think this question is very important to customers who are contemplating an investment in Hadoop. How widespread is Hadoop adoption today outside of the Google, Facebook, LinkedIn kind of Silicon Valley community? Among the mainstream enterprises, what's really happening and what's just talk? Anyone who'd like to comment on that?
This is David. I can jump in on that. I think what's interesting is that this is it is a disruptive technology, and it's very attractive to organizations who are you might use the word agile in terms of their adoption of new things to test it out, give it a drive around the block and see how that actually works. I think there are a lot of organizations of that ilk who are saying, let's see what we can actually do with this. I also wonder sometimes whether there's also a kind of a follow-on mentality among other organizations that read in the Wall Street Journal or Fortune or whatever magazine they happen to be reading that says everybody's doing this, so therefore they get concerned that their competitors are doing Hadoop and therefore they have to do it as well. The real challenge, though, is differentiating between organizations that are looking at the technology because they have a recognized need for the benefits that they can get from, whether it's extensibility, whether it's from scalability, whether it's because the systems they're using at this point are just not up to snuff when it comes to being able to satisfy their downstream needs. So when I talk to people out there in the field, I hear a lot of people who are saying, yeah, we're doing Hadoop, but very few of them, and again, this is outside of the realm of the originators of the different components. I don't see a huge number of them doing full-scale, enterprise-wide adoption, ripping and replacing their data warehouses or whatever operational systems they're running and replacing with Hadoop. Now that being said, I do see among some of our clients some serious adoption of the technologies and exactly in the same life cycle that Ron was talking about before, which is pure and simple. They see putting data on Hadoop as a cheaper way of that is better maintainable or sustainable over a longer time period than investing more money in some mainframe that they've been largely handcuffed to over a long period of time. So that is definitely one of those use cases that there is some adoption, and then there are all these organizations that are using it in smaller, you might say, in smaller environments where they're actually doing what the kind of stuff that Lonnie was talking about, as well as Ron, where they're implementing things or applications or algorithms in ways that they were not able to do it in the past, and they're looking to see how the return on their investment can be scaled up over time.
I think there's, across many large enterprises, we see a lot of investment in the IT cost optimization use cases. It's a very natural first thing to do with Hadoop, and where we see enterprises going beyond that as in areas where the kind of the two main themes are customer engagement. Right? I think that in this new digital world where you've got the barbarians, the Silicon Valley startups that are leveraging big data to build intimacy and connections with customers, whether it be people like Airbnb or Square or Spotify. There's new class of digital companies using Hadoop to build intimacy with customers, or a customer of ours, Beats Music, for example. On that one side, you're now that's one really important area where we see significant adoption. That seems to be a theme where we see going beyond IT use cases to what we think is critical to get the full value out of Hadoop, which is having a partnership between technology and business in order to drive high-value use cases. So that's where we see kind of companies crossing over from table stakes first implementations into the newer but really fast emerging area of adoption for business value.
So in the enterprise, we're all seeing some companies having successfully implemented their first Hadoop uses and moving on to broader use, and I think a lot of companies are beginning to explore and experiment. Why don't we ask our audience about the Hadoop use cases that interest them today? We have our first poll coming up in a minute, and we want to ask you, so what Hadoop use cases interest you today? And you can select the one that interests you the most. And we have ETL offload, data landing zone, data variety, sort of new types of data you might not have been able to deal with before, extremely large data volumes, or that you don't have a use case in mind, you're just exploring the technology. So please let us know what you're thinking. And meanwhile, let me ask Lonnie what use cases you've been seeing out in the field.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a while since we've encountered a large enterprise that isn't actively using Hadoop. And the more common scenario is we see maybe dozens of different Hadoop clusters within a large enterprise. Typically, there are a few that started within the business line to do something maybe more marketing and analytics or intimacy with the customer-like scenarios in order to avoid having to go through the IT organization to be able to do some high-performance analytics. And then within the IT organizations, often they're starting with use cases like offload, largely just because the staggering amounts of money they're able to free up in their annual budgets associated with the starting with an offload project can fuel not only the build out of the Hadoop cluster many, many times over, but it also provides a tremendous amount of ammunition that the organization can then use to hire an army of data scientists to let loose on the cluster, which has become a long-term active archive. And there's an emotional component to it as well, where people are, they find building a Hadoop cluster to be valuable beyond just the immediate technology capabilities that it has, because it's getting better quickly and it makes it easier to attract and retain talent. And the other thing we're seeing people experiment a little bit more with, not so much in the large financial institutions or the hospitals, but in other enterprises like retailers and telecommunications companies, is using Hadoop in the cloud. And so we launched our product recently on Amazon Elastic MapReduce, and it's pretty amazing how much cheaper the cloud-based Hadoop deployments are getting every day. You can just spin up a multi-thousand node Hadoop cluster in Amazon Elastic MapReduce for a very low hourly charge. And you can do a lot of the things we were talking about so far in the panel, everything from the next generation analytics use cases to offloading from legacy data warehouses without having to actually buy any machines or install them on premise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good comments. Well, our poll is closed, and here are the results. I think everyone can see them now. David, what's your first thought about these results?
I think that kind of reflects back on what I was just talking about earlier, which is that to some extent, so the three highest scoring items here, and they all kind of fall in the same ballpark, are data variety and large data volumes, and then exploring the technology. So the variety and the volumes, that to some extent may be influenced by the conventional definition of what big data really means and what Hadoop is being used for in terms of variety, volume, and velocity to some extent. So that's the question there is really, are people still kind of feeling out the technology? Are they really looking at specific applications that they want to transition over to a Hadoop ecosystem? Or when you look at the 15% of ETL offload and the 7% for data landing zone, that kind of again reinforces this tack that the people who are actually doing it are using it in a relatively IT centric scenario, and maybe anticipating the opportunity for migrating some application functionality to Hadoop after its value has been demonstrated from the IT perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting that the data variety result was among the use cases of people actually trying to do something was the highest, which suggests that there's a lot of interest in applying Hadoop to solving new problems, right? Being able to work with data sets that were hard to work with. That's when we'll see, like, take something as simple as clickstream data. A lot of times companies have been trying to use data warehouses to process that, and they find it really painful to do things like correlate series of events. That it's really hard to do these multi-way joins and have them work well in a database, whereas it's relatively straightforward to reorganize to have session-level data in Hadoop and make it easy to do analysis of sessions and more sophisticated ways of looking at what's going on a website inside of Hadoop.
Well, but clickstream data is not unstructured data, and people who are not adept at understanding how Hadoop really works could take a clickstream analysis that is trying to be deployed using something like a MapReduce, and they can make something that would run at a slow speed on a regular server could become incredibly molasses-like because of the flooding of the network with trying to navigate the transition between map and reduce in a MapReduce application. So when you say that there's an opportunity for looking at new ways of analyzing, you might say unstructured data. Maybe it's unstructured objects that have appended or associated with them all sorts of other characteristics. So things like images and photographs and graphics that are PowerPoint slides or videos or audio items and those kinds of things, where there's an ability to leverage the analysis of the item itself, and then it's transition into something that might be called semi-structured, and then use that to do some customer analytics where you're enhancing what typically would be put into a data warehouse with additional details about, this video camera captured this person looking at a particular pair of pants in the Gap, and now you've got finer levels of granularity of details that would feed into a customer-centric strategy.
Yeah, good comments. I think that the poll result shows kind of a healthy balance between cost optimization. It provides some validation for the idea that people are very interested in ETL offload, but at the same time, there are a significant percentage of the audience I see as looking in new directions, and I think that that speaks well for the bigger upside potential of Hadoop in businesses. And the interest in ETL offload takes us to our next topic. So let me ask the panel in general, or actually let me start with Ron. Ron, have you seen actual cases of ETL offload in the field? Is your firm developing solutions for that for customers, or have you built them?
Absolutely. We see that ETL offload or ELT offload, depending on the perspective, is often a natural first thing to start priming the pump, loading the data lake that a lot of organizations are starting IT cost optimization efforts by doing this kind of taking logic for how data is being loaded into data marts, data warehouses, and shifting that logic into a Hadoop cluster. So that becomes important. There's cases where, as I alluded to earlier, that they're very interested in not only taking that logic, but also doing some updates or modernization on the logic, accounting for perhaps a new data set that was too large to work with, maybe not sampling data, maybe retaining historical archive for longer. So there will often be a variety of characteristics. And the other thing you'll see is that this becomes a natural first step towards the analytic use cases that they're excited about. So we see that as a fairly common pattern, and as organizations are getting more sophisticated using Hadoop, it's becoming increasingly prevalent to see more sophisticated ETL offload projects going on.
So it's really happening. And so, Lonnie, maybe you can tell us what can go wrong in that kind of a project, and what do you see as keys to being successful?
So customers ideally would love to have a software product with a red button they could push, and it automatically siphons up all the legacy inefficient workloads from systems that are expensive and recreates them dynamically in Hadoop without having to do any work. We're a long ways from there. In the offload project itself is not always that glamorous, right? Because you do a bunch of work, and often what you end up with is a system that does the same thing as your old system. And however, the cost differential, because it's so great, in many cases up to 3 orders of magnitude cheaper, it just allows you to free up so much budget that it becomes worthwhile, and you're also getting an environment that's getting better faster than your existing environment. And so that typically will get the projects green lit. And then what they're looking for is something that makes that offload process as seamless as possible. So if they're offloading SQL from a legacy data warehouse, for example, Teradata, they want something that will analyze the BTEC SQL and give them suggestions for how to recreate it in MapReduce. They don't want to hire an army of Stanford computer science graduate students to cobble together Pig and Hive code. They want something that can leverage their existing skills. So a lot of times they have existing ETL developers or SQL programmers, and they want to be able to leverage that talent in Hadoop, and they want to make sure that it performs really well because they have qualities of service that they need to hit in their operational systems as well as their analytical systems that are dependent on some of these pre-processing environments that are absolutely critical, especially if you're a bank or an entity that has to do things before the end of the day or an overnight batch jobs. So performance becomes really important, and ease of migration becomes key. And that's true also for the mainframe offload scenarios where you're taking inefficient batch workloads from the mainframe and recreating them in MapReduce. So that's really where we've been focused, is making that offload process as easy as possible.
Okay, great. Let's move on to our next poll, which is for our audience that want to get into the business case topic directly, and for our audience that is contemplating a use of Hadoop or involved in one and have to make a business case, what do you expect your business case will need to show in order to have your company make the investment in Hadoop? And so the options we've offered are return on investment, cost savings, reduced time to value, feasibility, or some other key issue. So let's invite the audience to comment on that. And let me ask David, you have any guesses about what we're going to see here?
I have a feeling that if there was an all of the above button, that's what people would be selecting. Typically, you need to have some kind of demonstration of a return on investment, and that often is defined in terms of cost savings. But I think the challenge here is that we're trying to navigate like I said before, it's a disruptive activity, and the challenge is how do you navigate the desire to latch onto that disruption while you still got to keep the store running and be able to maintain productive operations while recognizing that over time you're going to have to make a decision about how to incrementally embed these new technologies into the infrastructure. So reduced time to value is extremely important. Feasibility, I think, is pretty critical, but I'll bet that the first two, return on investment and cost savings, are going to be the lion's share of the results.
I think that it's always the easiest to measure cost savings and get a return on investment from that. It's interesting when we see customers that have other kinds of motivations where rather than cost cutting, they're trying to create new business value. Most often there's more of a qualitative acceptance of how critical some new capability is for a competitive dynamic or being able to get something into market sooner. We have seen interesting business cases, like one of our customers in high-tech manufacturing, Western Digital, was really able to see tremendous improvement in productivity by finally being able to use big data in the cloud to take the complex multi-structured data their engineers work with and make it accessible and stop the waste of time that these experts were spending hunting down data sets to do their business. So there are some innovative business cases you see beyond cost cutting, but certainly that's the one that we see is the most common one. It's the easiest to measure and quantify.
Probably the easiest to get approved as well. So can we show our poll results now? So certainly there's a focus on ROI and cost savings. I'm hearing an echo. I hope somebody can eliminate that. And but an interesting, significant percentage are concerned with reduced time to value and feasibility. And one of my thoughts is that the feasibility factor may be larger in some of these new uses of data and analytics, which have not been successfully tackled before. So when you set out to do something that couldn't be done before, or couldn't be done economically before we had Hadoop, then part of what you need to demonstrate is that it can successfully be done. So let's move on now to our our focused discussion on the business case itself. If I could have the next chart. Let's start with you, Lonnie. What does a Hadoop business case look like?
So one of the things that we're seeing is that the organizations and actually the individuals who are able to successfully implement some of these offload projects, whether it's ETL offload or data warehouse or mainframe offload, start pretty quickly aggregating both political and budgetary power within a large enterprise because they're freeing up so many resources from either their own environments or from others. And then the business case manifests itself in a way that starts to look a little bit more like standards throughout the enterprise, because many of these companies will have multiple Hadoop clusters in existence of varying sizes. And some of them may have 100 nodes, some of them may be larger, others may be smaller, especially the business unit focused ones that are targeting either experiments or next generation use cases. And then the business case starts to take a bigger, meatier, more substantive role as here is the enterprise-wide value of this opportunity, which includes the near-term, so the very short-term cost saving, immediate cost savings associated with offload, and then the medium to longer-term dimension to it, which is here are all the revenue producing or competitive differentiation things that we can do with Hadoop because of its ability to do handle unstructured data, or trillions of clickstream transactions, or a level of variety of data, or duration of data that we weren't able to keep before. So you might see business cases that include both the near-term cost savings as well as a longer-term opportunity to better market to your customers or generate top-line revenue growth.
Good. Ron, how do your customers approach putting a business case together? And what kind of risk and challenges do they need to plan for?
Certainly, Richard. So a couple of thoughts on that. One is definitely we're often working with customers to help them with a roadmap for how they can use Hadoop and other big data technologies. And that starts with having both the business and technology leaders in the organization really come together and think about what might be possible. What are the opportunities for them to do more with their data and analytics? And the business cases for that will vary between cost optimization, being able to put together a business case around retiring legacy systems and putting data into a modern environment where the benefits of having a data lake and agile analytics can be an upside, through to other cases where there's more of a focus on immediate business impact. How do they reduce cycle time? What's the impact of the business of having data that's available within an hour instead of days or weeks later? And what's the business impact, even in the case of predictive models, of being able to provide better results? It could be something like tuning the bidding algorithm on a real-time bidding exchange, so that type of thing. So there's a range of business cases, and typically what we see is that you get sponsorship from an executive steering committee of leaders on the business and technical side around how to invest. One of the things I think it's interesting, though, is when you're beyond that first stage where you've had success in using Hadoop and you've got some early use cases, then you're starting to look at how do you measure and allocate the costs of the Hadoop cluster. So how do you fund the development of that shared capability, where it's typically highly advantageous to have data gravity, to have a lot of data in your Hadoop cluster and support a variety of use cases and business cases. But how do you measure the resource use and how do you allocate those costs to business units? That's typically not been the way most enterprises we work with have done it, where they've had a way of doing cost accounting and kind of allocating a shared resource to specific sponsor organizations. But as you look at adding significant capacity to a cluster, it becomes an important topic to think through. What's the business case for, and how do you get a given business unit to just budget for the capacity they need? So over time, it becomes their business case simply for doing new things that they want to do from a business standpoint and securing the resources needed. Lonnie, are you there?
This is Lonnie. So Cloudera has this concept of a enterprise data hub, and as we've seen some of these initial projects play out, people are looking to put more and more data into that hub with the knowledge that in the future they're going to have an array of additional business cases that they'll be creating. So a lot of what they're doing is trying to create standards and templates for what a future ROI for a Hadoop-related project will look like. And that's becoming an increasingly important part of the overall ROI story.
Yeah, definitely, that notion. David, how about from your perspective? What do you see going on with business cases in Hadoop?
Well, I would skip over the business case issue and kind of jump to some of the practical issues. Once you've gotten your business case vetted, I think that there's enough excitement about it that people often don't investigate the degree to which there are either some types of barriers or dependencies or systemic issues that need to be integrated into their perception of the level of effort for doing an experiment or a proof of concept and then an implementation. And a good example is I'm working right now with a client. They're interested in using Hadoop as a platform for a syndication of shared data sets. Yet the selection they made for the type of the vendor they have for Hadoop, not every vendor supports the same set of capabilities in their enterprise versions. And so if you want to be able to connect their legacy database to their emerging Hadoop cluster, suddenly they find out potentially that there's a conflict because the enterprise version they selected doesn't actually provide the full data accessibility capabilities that they were anticipating to be able to connect to their legacy system. So I think that's and I'm going to that whole question about obstacles, which is in theory a lot of these things sound really like they really make sense, but I've heard so many situations where the just because the entry is lowered, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's cheaper to do it. It just means that you've got to move your costs around in a different way. So other obstacles are there's still a skills gap, and I know from having sat in presentations of case studies where people talk about their implementations, and as they're describing what they were doing, I immediately said this thing is going to be performance poor because they're not taking into account the fact that their organization of data or their data modeling or their perception of downstream consumers of the data is not accommodated in a way that can squeeze watermelons through the head of a pin. And yes, while they can get the data into Hadoop and they can do their analytics and they can get their results, but they can't necessarily get the results facilitated or pushed down to the downstream users in a way that is timely or consistent. So you have to take those things into consideration, and when you do your business case, you have to make sure that you account for those types of obstacles, or at least propose that you do a proof of concept where you can flesh out what all those details are ahead of time, so that you don't get caught underestimating how much effort it really was going to take.
David, I think that's an important point. The other thing I'd observe is that because there's been others have gone that way before, that learning the best practices and finding out, instead of having to suffer the battle scars all over again, doing things like hiring experts who can help you as consultants get there more quickly, or leveraging modern tools that make it easier to do the integration, that these are all ways that you can mitigate some of the risks, and you don't have to tackle the project like it was 2 years ago and it was brand new in the enterprise using Hadoop. There's now a lot of expertise out there, a lot of resources you can draw on to avoid those risks.
Yeah, and that's really a good, those two comments are a good answer to the last question on our chart. What are some key issues in delivery? So we've just talked about that, and we have a couple of questions from the audience. So the first one is, any successful implementations of Hadoop on large local government sites? Have any of our panelists seen Hadoop in local or perhaps even state governments? Sounds like
so Don, I can say we've seen adoption certainly at federal government, and we know of interest at least in state government, but our main practice is commercial customers rather than government, so it's not an area that we spend a lot of time.
Yeah, I haven't seen it at the state level. I'm kind of curious what it would motivate the desire to do Hadoop at the state level. Is it data volumes? Is it data variety? I mean, what are the types of motivating factors at that?
Right. I think so. We don't have that information in the question, although I think in state government controlling costs and finding cost savings is certainly a perennial challenge.
Yeah, I mean, state and local government budgets, including the fiscal agent outsourcers and others who manage, large mainframe systems and legacy data warehouses for them, typically do run rate budgeting, even more so than commercial enterprises do. And so a modest amount of freeing up of resources from legacy systems by leveraging Hadoop can have dramatic effects on their ability to work on interesting next generation projects like advanced social services with predictive analytics and getting closer to the citizens and being more responsive to changes.
Right. Good. And another question we have from the audience is, can I put a star or snowflake schema into Hadoop? So anybody want to take a crack at that one?
I like to start by saying that in general, we think the best practice is that you don't organize your data in Hadoop based on traditional data warehousing patterns of star and snowflake schema, that typically you want to optimize batch computed views, derived ways of organizing information that make it easier to compute a variety of downstream things and do analytics. So as in the clickstream example, building a session record, or in the case of device analytics, instead of taking a time series of having one record per event, organizing by topic or theme, like a subsystem or overall assembly of activity. Now that being said, it is extremely common when you're doing ETL offload to then ultimately emit a kind of star schema as the output if you're targeting a traditional data warehouse as the final source system or a data mart. So it's feasible, and you can definitely create those on the back end. And of course, to do that, then you get into questions like creating identifiers for reference items if they're new, or being able to pull them in and do joins in the system in order to properly normalize the ultimate output.
Okay. Well, we're at the end of the hour. I want to thank our audience for attending, and I thank our panelists for lively and informed discussion, and our sponsor, SyncSort, for bringing this webinar to you.
Thanks, Richard. This was great.
Wish all of you a good day.